Undefined rain was coming down harder than it had all week. It wasn't the kind of nice, gentle rain that helps you sleep. It was the loud, pounding kind that hits the roof and makes you feel restless. For him, it was even worse because the heater in his apartment had chosen exactly this moment to stop working. He was sitting on his couch, wrapped in 2 blankets, shivering. He knew he couldn't stay like this. He needed something warmer, something heavier. He needed a proper winter coat. He grabbed his umbrella and headed out. The wind was cold, cutting right through his sweater. His plan was simple: go to the second-hand store a few blocks away. They always had old, heavy things that didn't cost much money. The walk felt longer than usual because of the weather. The streets were empty, and the puddles were growing bigger by the minute. Finally, he saw the small sign of the shop flickering in the distance. It was a cozy-looking place, cluttered with all sorts of random items. When he opened the door, a little bell rang, and the smell of old books and dust hit him. It wasn't a bad smell. It smelled like history. The shop was quiet, except for the sound of the rain outside and an old radio playing in the back room. An elderly man was sitting behind the counter, reading a newspaper. He didn't look up. He just nodded a silent greeting. He started browsing through the racks of clothes. There were wool jackets, leather coats, and things that looked like they were from a different time. He touched the fabrics, checking how thick they were. Then his hand brushed against something hidden in the back corner. It was a dark, heavy wool coat. It looked like it was military style, maybe from a long time ago. He pulled it out and tried it on. It fit him perfectly. It was warm, incredibly warm, like it had been waiting just for him. He checked the price tag. It was cheap enough that he didn't even have to think twice. He walked to the counter and paid the old man. The cashier barely said a word, just took the money and handed him the receipt. He put the coat on right there, feeling the coldness of the day instantly disappear. He walked back home, feeling much better now that he wasn't freezing. When he got back to his apartment, he hung the coat up in his closet and went to the kitchen to make some hot coffee. But as he was taking the coat off the hanger to hang it properly, he heard a crinkling sound. It was paper. It felt like there was something inside the lining of the coat. He frowned. He checked the pockets. They were empty. He checked the outside. Nothing. Then he carefully ran his hands over the inner lining of the coat again. There it was, a lump right near the bottom hem. Being careful not to rip the old fabric, he used a small pair of scissors to cut the threads holding the lining closed. He reached inside and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was old, the type of paper that turns yellow and brittle with age. The edges were rough, like someone had torn it out of a notebook in a hurry. He sat down at his kitchen table, the steam from his coffee rising up in front of him. He unfolded the paper. It wasn't a receipt or a label, it was a letter. The handwriting was messy, rushed, written in pen that was starting to fade. It read, "If you find this, it means they didn't find me first. I don't have much time. The coordinates are 34.05 minus 118.25. Don't trust the map. Look for the red door. The key is hidden where the water meets the stone. Do not go alone." He read it 3 times. His heart was beating a little faster now. Was this a joke? Did the previous owner of the coat leave this as a prank, or was it something real? The paper felt serious. The urgency in the handwriting made the hairs on his arms stand up. It felt like a scene from a movie, but here he was, sitting in his kitchen in his bathrobe, holding a mystery in his hand. He looked at the coordinates. He wasn't a geography expert, but he had a smartphone. He typed the numbers into the map application. The location wasn't in this city. It was hundreds of miles away in a completely different state. He stared at the screen. It was pointing to a remote area, what looked like a small patch of land near the coast. His mind started racing. Who was the person who wrote this? Why would they hide a note inside a coat lining? And most importantly, who were they? The note said, "They didn't find me first." That sounded dangerous. It sounded like someone was running away. He sat there for a long time just thinking. He told himself he should just throw it away. It wasn't his business. He bought a coat to keep warm, not to get involved in some stranger's secret life. But curiosity is a powerful thing. Once you see a closed door, you really want to know what's behind it. He couldn't stop wondering what was at those coordinates. Was it gold? Was it a hidden stash of money? Or was it just a meeting point for 2 lovers a long time ago? The next few days, he couldn't get the note out of his head. Every time he walked past the coat hanging in his closet, he felt a pull. He tried to live his normal life, going to work, eating dinner, watching TV, but everything felt boring. The mystery made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. On Friday evening, he made a decision. He couldn't just ignore it. He decided he would at least do a little bit of research. He went back to the second-hand store. He wanted to ask the old man about the coat. Maybe he knew who dropped it off. When he walked in, the store was just as quiet as before. The old man was behind the counter, fixing a broken watch. He looked up when he heard the bell. "Back again?" the old man asked, his voice raspy. "Yeah," he said, trying to sound casual. "I actually really love that coat I bought the other day. I was wondering if you knew anything about it, where it came from." The old man squinted his eyes. He stopped working on the watch and looked at him carefully. "People drop things off here all the time. Estate sales, cleanouts. I don't keep records of every old shirt." "Right, of course," he said. It's a great coat, high quality. I wondered if maybe it was part of a bigger collection." The old man paused. He leaned over the counter, lowering his voice. "That coat came from a box of things a woman brought in last month. She was in a hurry, looked like she hadn't slept in days. She sold me everything for a flat price, just wanted to get rid of it. She said she was moving out of the country." "Did she leave a name?" he asked. "No," the old man said, shaking his head. "But I remember her because she looked scared. She kept looking out the window the whole time, like she was expecting someone to walk in. It gave me the creeps, honestly." She paid in cash and left in a taxi. He felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the weather. The woman was scared. The note in the coat said, "They didn't find me first." It was starting to fit together. He left the shop quickly. His mind was made up now. He wasn't going to just throw the note away. He had to go to the coordinates. He had to see what was there. He went home and started packing a bag. He threw in some clothes, a flashlight, a pocket knife he had for camping, and the note itself. He looked up the location again. It was a 10-hour drive. He decided he would leave early the next morning. That night, he didn't sleep much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the frantic handwriting on the yellow paper. He wondered what he would find: a treasure, a trap, or absolutely nothing. The sun came up and the weather had cleared. It was a crisp, bright morning. He drank his coffee, grabbed his keys, and put on the coat. It still fit perfectly, still felt incredibly warm. He got into his car and started driving. For the first few hours, the highway was busy, and he listened to music to keep himself entertained. But as he got further away from the city, the traffic thinned out. The landscape changed from tall buildings to open fields, and then to thick forests. He stopped at a gas station to fill up the tank. An old man was pumping gas next to him. They nodded at each other. "Heading far?" the man asked. "Just taking a trip," he said. He didn't want to explain why. "Watch out on the old coast road," the man said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Landslides have been blocking the path. Easy to get lost if you don't know where you're going." "I have a map," he lied. He had his phone, but that was it. "Good luck," the man said and drove off. He got back on the road. The GPS on his phone eventually told him to turn off the main highway. The road became narrow and bumpy. The trees were so tall they covered the sky, making it feel like twilight even though it was the afternoon. He was relying on his phone signal, which was getting weaker and weaker. The bars on his screen dropped from 4 to 3 to 1. And then, no service. Perfect. Now he was truly alone. He kept driving, following the last direction he had seen. He was looking for a landmark. The note said, "Look for the red door." He drove for another 20 minutes until the road just stopped. It turned into a dirt path that was overgrown with weeds. He parked the car and decided to walk the rest of the way. It was quiet in the woods, too quiet. The only sounds were the twigs snapping under his boots and the distant call of a bird. He walked for about 15 minutes. The path wound up a small hill. As he reached the top, he looked down into a small valley. There, standing alone, was an old building. It looked like a storage shed or a small house abandoned years ago. The wood was gray and rotting, and on the front, facing him, was a door. It wasn't red anymore. It was faded to a pale, rusty pink, but he could tell it used to be red. He stopped. He pulled the note out of his pocket to read it again. "Look for the red door." This had to be the place. "The key is hidden where the water meets the stone." He looked around the building. To the side of the house, there was a rusty old pipe leaking water onto a large, flat rock. Water was dripping out of the pipe, slowly hitting the stone. Water meets stone. He walked over to it. He moved the wet leaves and moss away from the base of the rock. There, tucked into a crack in the stone, covered in dirt, was a small metal box. It was about the size of a shoebox. It was locked with a small padlock. He sat on the wet grass, his heart pounding in his chest. He used the small pocket knife he brought to pry at the lock. It was rusty and it felt fragile. With a sudden snap, the lock broke. He hesitated for a second. This was it, the moment of truth. He lifted the lid. The box wasn't full of gold bars or stacks of cash. Inside, there was a stack of photos, a small black notebook, and a single modern-looking USB drive. He picked up the notebook and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was the same as the note in the coat. If you are reading this, you have taken the first step, but be warned, the truth is more dangerous than the lie. They are watching. They are always watching. If you want to know what really happened, plug the drive in, but once you do, there is no going back. He looked up from the book. The woods around him were silent. He looked back at his car parked down the hill. Everything looked peaceful. But suddenly the peacefulness felt like a mask. He felt exposed. He shoved the notebook and the drive into his pocket, closed the metal box, and buried it back under the rock just in case. As he turned to head back to his car, he heard a sound. It wasn't a bird. It was the sound of a car engine. A car was coming up the dirt road. He froze. The only people who knew about this place were the ones who wrote the note and the ones they were running from. He ducked behind the side of the old building, pressing his back against the cold wood. A black SUV came into view, moving slowly. It stopped near the front of the house. He held his breath. He wasn't alone anymore. Part 1 was over, but the real danger wasn't defined, picking up right where we left off. We have to talk about what happens after the excitement fades. If you remember from the first part, starting something new is always the easy part. The adrenaline is pumping, you have your plan laid out, and you feel like you can conquer the world. But then a few days or weeks pass, and suddenly that shiny new thing called Crow starts to feel a lot like work. This is the part of the journey nobody really likes to talk about. It's not glamorous, and it doesn't make for a great movie montage, but it is arguably the most important phase. We are now in the thick of it. We are past the introduction, past the setup, and we are staring right at the middle section. And let me tell you, the middle section is where most people decide to quit. When we first looked at the Crow framework, it seemed so simple on paper. You had your steps, you had your goals, and it all made logical sense. But logic doesn't always help you when you wake up in the morning and it's raining, or when you just don't feel like doing the work. That is the human side of this process. We aren't robots. We can't just program a command and expect our bodies and minds to execute it perfectly every single time without complaint. I remember sitting there with a cup of coffee, staring at the next step in the Crow process, and feeling this heavy resistance. It wasn't that the task was hard. Honestly, the task itself was pretty simple. It was just the idea of doing it again and again that felt draining. Have you ever felt that? It's that mental fog where you know exactly what you need to do, but you start negotiating with yourself. I can do this later, or maybe I should skip just one day to reset. This is the dangerous zone. This is where Crow stops being a set of instructions and starts becoming a test of character. The interesting thing about this phase is that it forces you to find a new source of fuel. In the beginning, your fuel is excitement and novelty, but that fuel runs out fast. Once it's gone, you have to switch to a different kind of energy. You have to find discipline. Now, discipline sounds like a harsh word. It sounds like something military or strict. But in the context of Crow, discipline is actually quite gentle. It's about being kind to yourself but firm enough to keep moving. It's understanding that you won't always feel motivated, and that's okay. You don't need motivation to follow the Crow's steps. You just need to show up. So, what did we do when we hit this wall? We decided to stop looking at the huge mountain we had to climb. We stopped thinking about the final result. Instead, we zoomed in. We focused only on the tiny little circle right in front of our feet. We asked ourselves, what is the one small thing I can do right now to keep Crow moving? Sometimes, that one small thing was just opening a notebook. Other times, it was just sending a single email. When you break the Crow process down into these microscopic actions, it stops being scary. The anxiety melts away because you aren't trying to conquer the whole world today. You're just trying to conquer the next 10 minutes. This shift in perspective is huge. It changes the feeling of the whole experience from a heavy burden to something manageable, almost like a game. Another thing that really helped us during this part was changing how we talked about the process. Initially, we were saying things like, I asterisk have asterisk to do this. That phrase, I have to, it creates a feeling of being a victim. It makes you feel trapped, so we switched the language. We started saying, I asterisk get to do this. It sounds silly, and it might seem like just playing with words, but it actually changes your brain's relationship with the task. Suddenly, applying crow wasn't a chore we were forced to do. It was an opportunity we were chosen to be part of. We started looking for the little wins. Maybe we solved a small problem that had been bugging us for days. Maybe we just noticed that we were getting slightly faster at doing the routine. These aren't massive victories, but when you are in the middle of a long journey, you have to celebrate these small milestones. They are the water stations in a marathon. You don't skip them, you need them to survive. It's also fascinating to see how crow starts to affect other areas of life once you push past this initial resistance. When you commit to sticking with something even when it's boring, you build a kind of mental muscle. You start to realize that if you can stick to this, you can probably stick to other things too. Maybe your room starts getting cleaner because you're in the habit of organizing things. Maybe you start eating better because you're more conscious of your inputs. We noticed that the chaos in our daily lives began to settle down, not because the world outside changed, but because our internal world became more structured. The crow process acts like an anchor. When everything else feels like it's spinning out of control, you know that at least this one thing is solid. You know that if you follow the steps, you will make progress. That predictability is incredibly comforting. It gives you a safe harbor to return to at the end of a long day. Of course, it hasn't been all smooth sailing. There were days when we messed up. There were days when we got lazy or distracted by something shiny and new. That's just human nature. But the beauty of crow is that it's forgiving. It's not a rigid system that breaks if you make one mistake. It's flexible. If you fall off the horse, you just get back on. You don't spend a week beating yourself up about it. You just acknowledge it, learn why it happened, and keep going. In fact, making mistakes became part of the learning curve. Every time we slipped up, we learned something new about our own habits. We learned what time of day we focus best. We learned what kind of environment makes us lose focus. We learned which tools help us and which ones just get in the way. This self-knowledge is arguably just as valuable as the end goal of crow itself. So, as we move closer to the end of this phase, the feeling has shifted from dread to determination. The resistance is still there sometimes, but it's quieter now. It's easier to push through. We have found our rhythm. It's like learning to dance. At first, you step on your own toes and the music feels too fast. But after a while, your body knows what to do. You stop thinking about the steps and just start moving with the beat. And that is really the secret here. You want the crow process to become second nature. You want it to be something you do without thinking too hard, like brushing your teeth or locking the door when you leave the house. When you reach that level of automaticity, you know you've made it through the hard part. We are now seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. The results we were hoping for are starting to peek through. It's not a finished product yet, far from it, but the shape of it is becoming visible. And that visibility is exciting all over again. It reminds us why we started in the first place. Looking ahead, the challenge is going to change. It's no longer about just showing up, it's about refining what we've built. It's about polishing the rough edges and making sure the foundation is strong enough to hold whatever we build on top of it. But we aren't worried about that right now. We are just enjoying the fact that we are still here, still moving, and still proving to ourselves that we have what it takes to see this through. If you are following along with your own version of this, know that the struggle you might be feeling right now is normal. It's necessary. It's the fire that forges the metal. Don't be afraid of the boredom or the repetition. Embrace it. That is where the real growth happens. And remember, you don't have to be perfect, you just have to be persistent. The crow journey isn't a sprint. It's a marathon, and we are just getting our second wind. Stick around, because things are about to get really interesting. As we start to see all this hard work pay off in ways we undefined silence was the first thing that hit. It wasn't a peaceful silence, you know. It was the kind that presses against your ears, heavy and thick. Crow stood at the edge of the clearing, wiping sweat from a forehead that felt surprisingly cold. The last few hours had been a blur of running, dodging, and just trying to stay alive. Now, with the immediate danger past, the reality of the situation started to sink in. This wasn't just a walk in the park anymore. This was a test of everything. Looking around, the landscape had changed completely. The bright, open paths from before were gone, replaced by a dense, twisting forest that seemed to absorb the light. The trees here were old. Not just big old, but ancient, like they had been standing there since the world began, watching everyone who tried to pass through. Their branches interlocked overhead, creating a canopy so thick that you could barely tell where the sun was. It created a strange, twilight gloom even in the middle of the day. The air felt different here too, heavy with the scent of wet earth, pine needles, and something faint that smelled like metal, maybe old rust. Crow took a deep breath, trying to calm a heart that was hammering a bit too fast against the ribs. "You can do this," a voice whispered inside. It wasn't audible, but it was loud in the mind. Sometimes you just have to hear your own thoughts to know you're still real, still here. With a heavy sigh that seemed to get lost in the vastness of the woods, the journey continued. The ground was uneven, covered in roots that looked like snakes waiting to trip you. Every step had to be calculated. Lift the foot, place it down, check for stability, then shift the weight. It was slow going, frustratingly slow. The urge to just run and get it over with was strong, but rushing here meant a twisted ankle or worse, and in a place like this, being injured was basically a death sentence. There was no ambulance coming to save you. There was no backup. As Crow moved deeper, the forest seemed to come alive, not in a friendly Disney movie way, though. It felt watchful. There were eyes everywhere, small glints in the shadows. Maybe they were just animals, maybe they were something else. It didn't really matter. The feeling of being watched is enough to make your skin crawl, regardless of who or what is doing the watching. It messes with your head. You start seeing shapes in the corners of your vision. A shadow moves and your heart jumps, but it's just a branch swaying in a breeze you can't feel. About an hour in, a noise broke the rhythm of the crunching leaves. It was a soft, rhythmic sound. Water, Crow's throat felt like sandpaper. The thirst had been building up, a dull ache at the back of the mouth, but hearing the sound of water made it suddenly sharp and demanding. Following the sound meant veering off the rough path, pushing through thick walls of thorny bushes that scratched at arms and tore at the fabric of clothes. It hurt, but the promise of a drink was stronger than the sting of the thorns. Breaking through the final layer of brush, the sound grew louder. It wasn't a raging river, just a small, crystal-clear stream trickling over smooth, gray stones. It looked innocent enough, the water sparkling in what little light managed to poke through the leaves. Crow knelt by the bank, cupping a hand to let the water pool. It was freezing cold. Shockingly so. Taking a tentative sip, the water tasted crisp and clean, like melted snow. It washed away the dust and the fatigue, at least for a moment. While drinking, Crow noticed something resting near the water's edge. It was half buried in the mud, glinting slightly under the ripples. Curiosity getting the better of caution, a hand reached out and pulled the object free. It was a piece of metal, or maybe stone, shaped like a jagged gear. It was covered in intricate carvings that didn't match any language or symbol recognized. They looked like star maps, or maybe veins in a leaf, but holding it gave a strange sensation. A warmth that spread from the palm up the arm. It felt familiar, like holding a key to a house you lived in years ago but forgot the address of. "This changes things," Crow muttered, turning the artifact over in the fingers. It was heavy for its size, dense. If this was here, it meant others had been this way, not just wild animals, but people. Or someone capable of making things. And where there are people, there are answers, or at least better directions. The find injected a new burst of energy into tired limbs. The rest gave a second wind. The forest didn't seem quite as threatening now. It was still dark and creepy, sure, but it wasn't empty. There was a story here. Crow tucked the artifact safely into a pocket, patting it to make sure it was secure. Moving on, the terrain began to slope upward. The trees thinned out slightly, letting in slivers of real sunlight that pierced the gloom like spotlights. The climb was steep, testing muscles that were already screaming for rest. Legs burned, lungs heaved, but there was a goal now. Find the source of this artifact, find where the path led. Finally, reaching the top of the ridge, the view opened up. It was one of those moments that makes you stop and just stare, forgetting how to breathe for a second. Below lay a vast valley, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. But it wasn't just nature. In the center of the valley, standing tall and proud, were the ruins of a massive structure. It looked like a castle, or maybe a temple, made of the same dark stone as the forest. It was broken, crumbled in places, with vines climbing up the walls, but it still held a sense of power. It commanded respect. A cold wind blew up from the valley, carrying with it the sound of distant bells. Not happy wedding bells, but slow, mournful ones that seemed to vibrate in the chest. Crow stood there for a long time just watching. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. That place down there, that was the destination it had to be. Every instinct was screaming that the answers lay within those walls, but the sun was dipping lower. The shadows in the valley were stretching out, lengthening like dark fingers trying to grab the ruins. Night was coming fast, and being out in the open on a ridge wasn't the smartest move. It's exposed, too visible. Scrambling back a bit from the edge, there was a small overhang near a cluster of rocks. It wasn't a hotel, but it would have to do for shelter. Gathering some dry wood from under the trees, keeping an eye out for spiders or snakes, obviously, a small fire was soon crackling. The light was a comfort, pushing back the encroaching darkness. Sitting close to the warmth, eating a cold, squashed ration bar that tasted like cardboard but was absolutely necessary for energy, Crow thought about the day. It's funny how things change. One minute you're just trying to get by, and the next you're holding ancient gears and staring at lost temples. Fear was still there, hiding in the pit of the stomach, but it was mixed with something else now. Excitement, purpose, maybe a little bit of both. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up into the night sky. Looking up, the stars were incredible. There were so many of them, brighter than anything seen back in the city. It made the problems feel small, but also made the traveler feel incredibly alone. Just a tiny speck under a giant, indifferent sky. Tomorrow, Crow said softly, staring into the flames, watching the orange and red dance. Tomorrow I go down there. The night passed in a fitful sleep. Dreams were strange and fragmented, images of the gear, the sound of the bells, and running down endless hallways where the floor kept falling away. Waking up with a start as the fire had burned down to glowing red embers, the air was biting cold. Shivering, Crow threw the last of the wood on, watching the flames catch hold again, grateful for the heat. Dawn broke slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The valley below was filled with mist, swirling around the ruins like a ghostly blanket. It looked even more mysterious in the morning light, like something out of a storybook. Packing up the small camp, making sure to leave no trace behind. Respect for nature is important. Even when you're on a life-changing quest, the journey down the ridge began. The descent was harder than the climb. Loose gravel made every step treacherous. One slip and you could tumble all the way to the bottom. About halfway down, the mist started to clear. The details of the ruins became sharper. There was a gate, massive and iron, hanging open on one hinge. It beckoned. Reaching the valley floor felt like stepping into another world. The air here was still, strangely calm. The sheer size of the ruins was overwhelming up close. The walls were towering, covered in moss and cracks that looked like lightning bolts frozen in time. Crow approached the gate slowly. Every sense was on high alert, listening for creaks, for footsteps, for breathing. But there was nothing. Just the sound of the wind whistling through the broken windows. It felt like a ghost town or a tomb. Stepping across the threshold, the courtyard inside was overgrown. Weeds and wild flowers had reclaimed the stone pavement. In the center stood a statue, toppled over, its face eroded by centuries of rain. Walking past it, Crow felt a shiver. This place felt sad. Then a sound, not the wind this time. A distinct footstep. Crunch. Crow froze, pressing against the nearest wall, heart rate spiking. Peering around the corner, there was movement near the far archway. A figure. It was hooded, moving with a slow, deliberate pace. It didn't look like a monster, it looked like a person. Should Crow call out, stay hidden, attack? The instinct was to hide, to wait, but the gear in the pocket seemed to heat up again, pulsing slightly against the hip. It was a signal, or maybe a warning. Taking a risk, Crow stepped out from the shadow. Hey! The voice echoed a bit louder than intended, bouncing off the stone walls. The figure stopped, It didn't turn around immediately. It just stood there frozen. Then slowly it began to turn. The face under the hood was shadowed, but as the light hit it, Crow realized something shocking. The figure didn't look surprised. They looked like they had been waiting. The figure raised a hand, not in aggression, but in a gesture that meant stop or wait. They held a staff that looked similar to the gear found in the river. "You have the piece," the figure said. Their voice was raspy, like dry leaves rubbing together. "We wondered if it would find its way back here." Crow's eyes widened. "Back, you know what this is?" The figure lowered their hood. It was an older face, lined with years and worry, but with eyes that sparkled with intelligence. They looked tired. "We know many things," the figure replied, a small, weary smile forming. "But knowing why you are here, that is a story for another time. Right now you need to hide." "They are coming." "Who is coming?" Crow asked, gripping the artifact tighter, suddenly feeling very exposed in the middle of the courtyard. "The ones who broke this place," the figure whispered, glancing nervously at the sky. "The ones who want the pieces back, come." Quickly, the figure turned and darted through a narrow doorway in the ruins, disappearing into the shadows. Crow hesitated for a split second. Trusting a stranger in a spooky ruin is usually a terrible idea. Every horror movie ever made says don't follow the mysterious stranger. But looking around the empty courtyard, hearing the distant sound of mechanical whirring from the sky above, it didn't seem like there were many other options. Taking a deep breath, Crow ran after the figure, disappearing into the darkness of the corridor just as the sound of heavy, metallic boots echoed from the gate. The door slammed shut behind them, cutting off the light. "The real adventure was just beginning, Gundefind. You have been following this journey with us. You know, we have reached a point where there is no turning back." When we last left off, the silence in the facility was heavy, almost like a physical weight on your chest. We were standing right in front of the main entry point to the Crow sector. Remember, people used to whisper stories about this place when it was first built, but nobody really knew the truth. Now we are here, and the air feels different. It's colder, sharper, and it tastes like metal. As we stepped across the threshold, the first thing that hit me wasn't the visual, it was the sound. Or I should say, the lack of it. You know how your ears ring when it gets too quiet? That is exactly what happened here. The hum of the machinery we had been hearing for the last few hours just vanished. It was like someone had pressed a mute button on the world. My partner looked at me, and I could see the fear in their eyes, but also that spark of curiosity that keeps us moving forward. We didn't speak, we just pointed our lights into the darkness. The beam of the flashlight cut through the dust like a laser. The particles were dancing in the light, swirling around as if they were alive. That is when we saw the first true sign of Crow. It wasn't a monster or a high-tech laser grid. It was a simple, rusted door with a symbol etched into it. It looked like a spiral that looped back on itself infinitely. Running my fingers over the metal, I could feel a vibration. It was faint like a purring cat, but it was there. The metal was warm despite the freezing air in the corridor. That warmth felt so human, so out of place in this cold, dead concrete shell. It made the hair on my arms stand up. We pushed the door open, and what we found inside honestly changed everything I thought I knew about this project. The room was huge, much bigger than it looked from the outside. It felt like walking into a cathedral, but instead of holy statues, there were rows of these strange glass pods. They were lined up perfectly, disappearing into the darkness at the far end of the room. Each pod was glowing with a soft, pulsing blue light. It was beautiful in a haunting way. Now here is where it gets really interesting. We walked up to the first pod. I was expecting to see equipment, maybe wires or a computer server inside. But I was wrong. Inside the glass, there was just a single chair. It looked like a dentist's chair from the 1980s, covered in leather that had cracked with age. But the weirdest part, there was a pair of glasses sitting on the seat. Just regular, thick-rimmed glasses. It looked like someone had just gotten up a minute ago to grab a coffee. Seeing that made my heart race. It stopped feeling like an exploration of a ruin and started feeling like we were intruding on someone's life. Who sat there? What were they looking at? I wiped the dust off the glass to get a better look, and that is when I noticed the small screen attached to the base of the pod. It flickered to life the moment I touched the glass. It wasn't a bright, modern screen. It was one of those old green monochrome monitors. The screen displayed a single sentence, Subject 742, response recorded. We looked at each other. The silence in the room suddenly felt very loud. Response recorded, I whispered. But to what? There were no buttons, no keyboards, no way to input data. It was just a chair and glasses. We moved to the next pod. Same setup, same screen. But this time the screen was dark. I touched the glass, but nothing happened. It felt dead. However, when I shined my light on the chair, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There were scratches on the leather. Deep, frantic gouges, as if someone had been trying to claw their way out. This is the part of the story that gives me chills even now. Crow wasn't just a machine or a piece of software. It was a testing ground. But what were they testing? We moved deeper into the room. The blue lights got dimmer, and the air got harder to breathe. It felt stale, like we were breathing air that had been trapped here for 50 years. We reached the end of the row, and there was one final pod. It was larger than the others. It was elevated on a metal platform, almost like a stage. This pod wasn't made of glass. It was made of a solid black material that swallowed the light from our flashlights. We couldn't see inside, but there was a microphone stand right next to it. A classic, old-school microphone. It made me think of a radio station. I walked up to it. I didn't touch it. I just leaned in close. I wanted to see if there was any power left in this place. I looked at my partner and signaled for them to stay quiet. I put my ear close to the black pod. Do you know what I heard? Nothing. No hum, no vibration, just absolute emptiness. But then I swear to you I felt a breeze. A soft, cold breeze coming from inside the solid black box. That shouldn't be possible. There were no vents, no cracks. It was solid. But the air was moving. We started to realize that Crow wasn't about recording data from the outside world. It was about projecting something from the inside out. Those scratches on the chair. They weren't from someone trying to escape the room. They were from someone trying to escape their own mind. The glasses, the microphone, the screens. It was all about sensory input and output. They were putting people in these chairs and exposing them to something that came from that black box. We decided it was time to leave. The energy in the room had shifted. It felt hostile, like the facility knew we weren't supposed to be there. We started backing away slowly. As we turned to head back the way we came, the lights in the pods began to strobe. Not a steady flash, but a chaotic, flickering pattern that made it hard to see. It felt like the room was spinning. My partner grabbed my arm to steady me, and I could feel their hands shaking. "Did you hear that?" they asked. "Hear what?" I replied, my voice sounding thin in the vast space. It sounded like a voice, a whisper. I listened. At first, nothing. Then, over the sound of the flickering lights, I heard it too. It wasn't coming from the pods. It was coming from the walls. It was a low, rhythmic murmur, like a crowd of people talking in a restaurant, but muted. It was the sound of 1,000 conversations happening at once, but none of them clear enough to understand. We walked faster. The whispering got louder. It wasn't aggressive, but it was overwhelming. It felt like being in a dream where you are trying to run, but your legs are heavy. We reached the rusty door with the spiral symbol. The vibration in the metal was stronger now, almost buzzing against my hand. We shoved it open and practically fell back into the corridor. The moment the door slammed shut behind us, the noise stopped. The silence returned, but it was a peaceful silence this time. We leaned against the wall, just breathing. I looked at my hands. They were trembling uncontrollably. It takes a lot to scare me, but this place got into my head. Standing there in the dim light of the hallway, we tried to piece together what we had just seen. Crow stands for something much deeper than we thought. It's not just a code, it's an interface. A bridge, the black box at the end was the source, and those chairs were the receivers. But where was the signal coming from? Was it a recording or was it live? We decided to check the footage from the camera I had mounted on my shoulder. I wanted to see if the microphone had moved or if the lights had done anything strange that we missed in the panic. I rewound the clip and pressed play. We watched ourselves walk up to the black box. We watched me lean in to listen. But then we saw something that made the blood drain from our faces. On the screen, when I leaned in to listen to the box, the black surface wasn't solid. For a split second, the footage showed a reflection in the black material. But it wasn't my reflection. And it wasn't my partner's reflection. It was a third person, standing right behind us. A tall figure just watching. I froze. I paused the video. We looked at the timestamp. That was 30 seconds ago. We were alone in that room. I swear we were alone. We checked the hallway, empty. We checked the room again through the small glass window in the door, empty. So here we are. Part 4 of our journey into Crow ends with more questions than answers. We have the scratches on the chair, the sensory deprivation pods, and now, a figure on the camera that we didn't see with our own eyes. Is Crow a ghost story? Is it a psychological experiment gone wrong? Or is it technology so advanced that it messes with our perception of reality? We are taking a break right now to process all of this. My hands are still shaking a little bit as I write this down. But we aren't leaving. Not yet. That reflection in the black box, it looked like it was pointing at something. We need to go back in. We need to find out what it was pointing at. There is a loose panel in the floor of that room that we didn't have time to check. If Crow is hiding a secret, that is where it will be. Stay tuned. Things are getting weird, and honestly, I'm not sure if we are the explorers anymore, or if we are the ones being explored. Keep your doors locked tonight, and remember, not everything that stares back from the dark is just a shadow. Sometimes it's the Crow protocol watching you. Undefined, here we are again, settling into the rhythm of things. If you have been following along with this journey, you know by now that stepping into the role of the key risk owner, let's just keep calling it the Crow for short, isn't about holding a fancy title or sitting in a corner office. It is about something much deeper. It is about the invisible safety net you weave for everyone around you. When we left off in the last part, we were talking about how to spot the trouble before it walks through the front door. But today, in part 5, we need to have a real heart-to-heart about what happens next. It is time to talk about the grind, the relationships, and the human side of keeping things safe. You see, being the Crow is often misunderstood. People think you are the no person. They think your job is to stop the fun, to block the new ideas, or to be the wall that everyone runs into when they are trying to get things done quickly. And honestly, if you do the job poorly, that is exactly what you become. You become the bottleneck. You become the person everyone avoids in the hallway. But a true Crow, someone who really understands the heart of this role, knows that it is not about saying no. It is about saying, yes, but how? It is about finding the path through the woods without getting eaten by the bears. And that requires a completely different set of skills, a set of skills that are entirely human. Let's talk about the feeling of the middle of the project. The beginning is easy. Everyone is excited. The energy is high. The risks seem theoretical, like monsters under the bed that you know aren't real. But then weeks or months go by, the excitement fades. The deadlines start looming like storm clouds on the horizon. This is the danger zone for a Crow. This is where the human element really kicks in. When people get tired, they get sloppy. When people get stressed, they cut corners. It is just human nature. We have all done it. We think, oh, I will just skip this one check. It will be fine. What are the odds? As the Crow, your job at this stage isn't to walk around with a clipboard wagging your finger. If you do that, you just become noise. Your job is to be the calm in the chaos. You have to understand why people are cutting corners. Are they overwhelmed? Do they not have the right tools? Are they confused about the goal? If you can figure out the human reason behind the risky behavior, you can fix it without ever having to argue about the rules. It becomes less about compliance and more about support. Imagine you are working with a team that is rushing to launch a product. You notice that they are skipping the final safety checks on the software. Now a robot Crow would send an email saying, "You violated procedure 4B, please correct immediately." And what happens? The team gets annoyed. They think you don't care about their deadline. They might even try to hide things from you next time, but a human-centric Crow walks over to the team lead. You bring a coffee, you sit down, you ask, "Hey, I see things are moving fast. Is everything okay? Why are we skipping the checks?" Maybe the team lead tells you, "We just found out the client moved the deadline up by 2 days. We are panicking." Suddenly, the dynamic changes. You aren't the enemy anymore. You are a problem solver. You can say, "Okay, I get it. But if we skip this and the system crashes, the deadline won't matter because we will lose the client." Is there a small part of the check we can do that covers the biggest risks? Can we push back on something else to buy time? You are working with asterisk them, not against asterisk them. That is the secret sauce. That is how you expand the role of a Crow from a policy enforcer to a trusted partner. Another huge part of this role that people often forget is communication. And I don't just mean sending reports. I mean storytelling. When you talk about risks to the people in charge, the people who hold the purse strings, you have to speak their language. You cannot just say, there is a high likelihood of variance in the data stream. That puts people to sleep. You have to make it real. You have to make them feel it. You have to say, look, if this server goes down during the holiday sale, we aren't just looking at a technical error. We are looking at thousands of angry customers. We are looking at our reputation taking a hit that takes years to fix. We are looking at people losing trust in us. You are painting a picture. You are connecting the technical risk to the human impact. Because that is what leaders care about. They care about people. They care about trust. They care about the story of the company. When you bridge that gap, when you translate risk into real-life consequences, you become incredibly valuable. You stop being a cost center and start being an advisor. But let's be real for a second. This is exhausting work. Being a crow means you have to care more than anyone else sometimes. It means you have to be the one thinking about the worst-case scenario when everyone else is celebrating a win. It can feel lonely. You might feel like the party pooper. There will be nights where you go home wondering if you are being too paranoid, if you are worrying about things that will never happen. This is the psychological burden of ownership. It is the weight of knowing that if something slips through the cracks, you are the one who has to answer for it. How do you deal with that? You have to find the balance. You have to realize that you cannot fix everything. You cannot control the wind, but you can adjust the sails. You do your best, you put the guards in place, you warn the people, and then you have to trust the system. Part of the human experience is accepting that we are not perfect. Mistakes will happen. Your goal isn't to create a world with zero risk, because that world doesn't exist. Your goal is to create a world where the risks are understood, calculated, and manageable. You are trying to make the ship sturdy enough to weather the storm, not trying to stop the storm from coming. There is also a beautiful side to this role that often gets overlooked. When you do it right, you build a culture of trust. When people see that you aren't just out to get them, but that you are trying to help them succeed safely, something amazing happens. They start coming to you. They start saying, hey, I'm thinking about trying this new thing, but I'm worried it might be risky. Can we talk about it? That is the golden moment. That is when you know you have made it. You have moved from being the police officer to being the architect. You are helping them build their dreams on a foundation that won't collapse. Think about the impact of that. When a team feels safe to talk about risks, they become more creative. They take better risks. They aren't paralyzed by fear of the unknown because they know you have mapped out the terrain. You become the person who gives them the courage to innovate. It sounds ironic, doesn't it? The person whose job it is to prevent disaster is actually the one enabling the team to be brave. But that is exactly how it works. Safety and speed aren't opposites. Real safety makes speed possible. You can't drive a car fast if you are terrified the brakes are going to fail. But if you know the brakes are solid, you can fly. So as we wrap up this part of our discussion, I want you to think about the people around you. Don't just look at the spreadsheets and the probability charts. Look at the faces. Listen to the stress in their voices. Understand the pressure they are under. The best crow is the one who understands that risks aren't just numbers on a page. Risks are things that affect people's jobs, people's livelihoods, and people's mental health. Expanding the crow role is about expanding your empathy. It is about realizing that every rule, every protocol, and every checkpoint exists because a human being somewhere didn't want to see another human being get hurt or fail. Keep that at the center of everything you do. Be the person who